to turn the sound off.
All right, so
there we go. We're all ready to go, talking about budgeting.
So hopefully people are there, because we've been scarred once this week with not.
I know, with the whole technology thing.
Right. So we need to know that people are out there. So let us know if you can see and hear us.
Yeah, I see nobody there right now. And actually, let me see if we look like we're live on Facebook. Because right at the moment, we don't. Oh, look, people are joining us, so we must be live.
All right.
Oh, yeah, we are live, so that's good.
All right.
Oh my gosh, we've had like massive technology issues this week, so let us know if you're out there, because we don't trust anything anymore. we only trust if you say you're there. Oh, yeah, Misty says she's there, so that's good. That's very good. Well, we're going to get started in just a second, so we're glad some of you are popping on here. Let us know where you're from. We always like to know where people are tuning in from, wherever you're tuning in from.
And I'm excited that we've got people that want to talk budgets. I mean,
exactly.
Things are like looking up.
That's what I'm thinking. Beth Brown says she's here, so that's good too. Awesome. Where's everyone from? It is hot. I have to just say, it is hot in Colorado right now. It's like 81 today.
That's pretty hot for you.
I know. It's not October Colorado weather at all.
Mm.
So I'm going to take my dog for a walk in shorts right after this call, which normally I'm in winter weather clothes. So it's really weird.
Wow.
So I'm ready for cold weather though.
Yeah. You love the winter.
I know. It's because I don't like to sweat. Oh, Misty's from Northern California. Hopefully you're not near any of those fires. It's crazy. Yeah. And Sabine is here from Canada. We always love having our Canadian friends joining us, so that's great too.
Absolutely.
Well, we are going to go ahead and get started as people continue to join us. And I guess I will start by saying, if you are not on our, I'm going to say this at the end too, but now I'm trying to say it at the beginning and the end, which is that you can share this post with anyone that you know that might want a little help with budgeting or learning about finances. You can share this with them by just clicking on the share button and send it over to them, and they can watch it now or later. And also, we do have a Facebook group that is called Grow Your Pet Care Business. So you're welcome to join us over there. I'll put a link in the comments. And we just like to continue the discussion over there. But that Facebook group is filled with lots of other pet care facility owners who are all really super nice and willing to help one another. So we have a nice community over there. Our only two rules, if you've heard me promote that group before, is that you have to be nice and that you can't sell stuff. But otherwise, it's an open forum to discuss whatever you want. So join us over there as well. All right. Do you want to kick off budgeting, Susan?
I do. I want to kick off budgeting by actually thanking everyone who is joining us or watching this, because that's the first step.
That's very true.
Learning more about it. And the other thing I want to say is everybody can learn to do a budget. That it doesn't have to be this gigantic, I guess, elephant that you're trying to paint, that we talked about when we did our educational webinar on this, is that everybody can learn to budget, and there's so much value to your business. I think it's the one tool for your business that actually will help align where you want your business to go, because it provides you the data of the actual steps and reality of getting there. And I think what we've done this now, Robin and I, for a few years when we had the dog, it was kind of a fun thing, and we had cash and money, and so we really didn't operate with a budget, and I guess
got money in the bank, we're good.
Exactly. And things were great. But
I did that with my pet care facility actually for periods of time as well. It was just kind of like, we're not having Or if you're having trouble, then you're like, I don't have any money. What's the point of a budget? Like that could go either way, really. But yeah.
But I can't imagine this year, if we hadn't had a budget, how much stress we would have been under on top of just dealing with the changes from COVID. Because one of the first things we did was we moved to a weekly review of where we were compared to budget and started making adjustments to our budget based on the changes that were going on. And right away, we knew we could be okay, that it wasn't going to be the end of the world. But we also had kind of like plan A and plan B if some revenue things we were planning didn't work out.
Yeah.
And so right away, it gave you that peace of mind of, okay, I've got some benchmarks and milestones to know what I need to do in my business. And so that's what I love about that budgeting, is it does give you data and confidence rather than just waiting to see what the results are. You can be proactive with making decisions for your business.
I have a quick question, if anyone's willing to answer it. Is if you don't do a budget, I would just be interested in knowing why. I know why I didn't do a budget, and I'll share that in a minute. But for those of you that maybe don't focus on doing a budget, I would just be interested in knowing why. I think a lot of times the why is, they don't know how, or it takes too much time. And let's face it, it's not the fun stuff. They'd rather work with dogs. But yeah, I would love to hear that. I know for me, I didn't do it primarily because of time. And that's probably not 100% true, except in the sense of when it came to prioritizing thing, it was the one thing that was really easy to push to the side. So I did struggle with, I knew how to do it, but I felt like it wasn't very easy. Yeah. And I feel like it's a lot easier now, I think, just from working with it and dealing with it. So Stacy said no time and worried about things not working out correctly. That's a great one.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah. And for me,
sometimes.
Yeah, I knew how to do a budget, but I didn't always have one in my business either. And the main reason is because I was spending time doing the bookkeeping. And so it's like, that's how I use my financial time. And on top of everything else, I didn't want to go back into the finances and do a budget. So it was a bad decision on my part in hindsight. I think that's part of the reason why I'm so obsessed with trying to get other people to do their budget, because I know how much money I left on the table for my business because I didn't do it.
Well, and so to Stacy's question about things not working out, that's a really good point. When I said when I first started my business and I wasn't making a lot of money, I kind of had that, like, why budget? I already know it's bad. It's probably not really the right attitude. But I can also tell you that when COVID happened, back in March, for the dog gurus, we ended up, and I know I've talked to a few pet care facilities that did the same thing, is we went back to our budget, because we did have a budget, and we ended up with like 4 different budgets. We had like, this is what will look like if we at that point, for many of you that knew, we had scheduled a live event back in March, which we had to cancel. So we had a budget to show us what was going to happen if we didn't have the live event. A budget is what would happen if we did the live event and nobody showed up. What would happen if we refunded everybody and then tried to do something later. We had all these budgets, and not just for the live event, but also for, how the industry was being impacted. So instead of us saying, I don't want to do a budget because it's going to look bad, we actually did a budget to see how bad it would look. And so we could actually then use that budget to make our adjustments based on what we were seeing. So we immediately saw we were losing some revenue. What could we come up with to generate more revenue? Like, we had that conversation. We had the conversation of, if things get bad, who do we need to lay off? Like, we talked about that. So, and then we took those payroll expenses out of the budget to see the impact of changing that. Thankfully, we ended up not laying off any of our staff, but that was because we turned towards another solution of generating revenue different ways. So it's
cut back on some of our contractors and
Yeah,
reduced.
we did. We went through our budget with a fine-tune comb and said, like, what stuff can we stop? What contractors can we cut some of our contracting services in half. We ended some services or put them on hold. So yeah, there were a lot of decisions made, and we could see the immediate impact as how it was going to help us or hurt us by having all those different budgets. And then ultimately we chose the budget we liked the best at the time and started going forward with that. So
It
I think that's
can
important.
definitely be a motivator, I think, to break out of that pattern of just, because my financial results were not always rosy in my business. And so it is hard sometimes to put that on paper and look at it. But then you just get into this pattern that you're not using the data and what's available to you to change a situation and break out of it. And I think this is really important coming out of 2020 and going to 2021. And, one of the tips I have about when you do judge, I'm not going to say when you budget for 2021, my tip, especially if you're doing lodging, would be to be very conservative and come in low and not think that I'm going to be back next summer to 2019 summer levels. I would probably look at what 2020 was and maybe the best occupancy I had in summer of 2020. That's probably what I would plan for 2021, hoping it would be better, but saying, I think this is as low as it could go. Because then, part of this is a mental thing. If it's better, I think it's great. Then you can adjust. No, you got to bring staffing back, especially if you know what those units are and are kind of tracking how your occupancy and units are comparing to what you put into your budget. But I really think mentally, not reaching targets again in 2021 is going to be really hard to take. So I would definitely recommend everybody come in conservative and not think everything's going to be back to 2019 right away.
At that time thing, hopefully I think we're still live. This is just a week of technology weirdness. So I was going to say, I also would look at what that does to your revenue, because one way of looking at it is it's going to be really depressing because you're going to see a big dip, especially compared to 2019 numbers if you were open then and active and busy then. But it also gives you the information you need to know to say, what other revenue streams can we create to fill in the blanks of the fact that we're not getting as much lodging revenue. And that's one of the things that we've been working with a lot of our clients with really ever since March until now. And we've had some people that picked the ball right up in March and immediately started creating new revenue streams. We have some people that didn't, and they waited a little bit longer. Some are just starting to do it now. But if you haven't done it yet, I think you're definitely going to need to do that going into 2020, unless you just happen to have enough cash that a continued dip into 2021 of your revenue streams isn't going to affect you, which is very few of us. And the reality is we really need to start planning what that's going to look like and what you can do. And that might mean completely changing your business model or adapting it, at least temporarily. So,
and I also wonder how many business owners out there to make it through 2020 have cut your own pay severely or even stopped taking pay to make the business survive, because I kind of know our audience and know that's decisions I made in the past, which is not sustainable long term. And so I think for 2021, another benefit of doing a budget is building in the pay you need from your business to contribute to your household and making that a priority. And then figuring out, okay, how much revenue do I have to make that happen? And, from what services is it realistic to get that revenue?
So Stacy was asking, what's the best way to start? Do you take the previous year's number and just start playing around with those? She's been in business for a while and just has never done a budget. So it's great that you're looking at this. But what advice would you give for that, Susan?
Yeah, I would definitely look at that, but I wouldn't look at it and say, I just want to look at total revenue for daycare and lodging and grooming, because that doesn't help you know the details about how you're going to get to that number. So let's say I want to get $10,000 a month from my daycare services. What I would do, or that's kind of where you're, let's say that's been your number. You do $10,000 a month in daycare. I would want to break that down and say, okay, how do I get that $10,000? How many daycare visits is it? And what is that average rate that I'm collecting? And the reason I like to look at it, at least for your key services, so that you have the units and the pricing to come up with that number, is because then you have formulas that you can play with if you don't feel like you're going to have enough money. So if I've got in an Excel spreadsheet my units by month and my rate, and I don't know why that's happening.
It did stop for us. The video stopped for a second, but then came back on. So I think that must have been what just happened now. Okay. But it's still playing because I looked on there. So hopefully you guys are still out there and can still hear us, because we're just seeing weird things behind the scenes here. But it does look like people are still there. So, okay. All right, so we'll just keep going.
Yeah. So in my example, let's say, looking at doing 120,000, but I'd really like that to be 150. So I need to make 30 more thousand over the year. You could look at, okay, how many units do I need to increase to get there? Or what if I raise my rates? Or I do a combination of both. And then you will also be able to track, if you know you're wanting an increase in units, you can start tracking that month, even week by week or day by day, to see how close you're getting to what your goal is that your budget's based off of. So does that make sense? Robin's always my check if what I say is making sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I do think that looking at, this is a great time as you do that budget to maybe look at, do you want to increase revenue, and do you want to add some kind of a membership component or a VIP component? We've talked a lot about that in the past. I was just talking yesterday at Pet Sitters International Conference, and was talking to the pet sitters about, look, if you, and this is true for every industry, if you don't have a top tier option, you should be creating that, whether it's a membership program, whether it's just a VIP option, whether it's just an add-on thing, whatever. There's a million ways to do it. But if you have a base rate, let's say for daycare, your base rate is $35, you'll get people to pay that, but you're going to always have a few people that will pay a little bit more for something, for extra service. And listen to your clients, because they might be the ones that are telling you what that might be. They might come in and say, hey, I had a client, I think I told this story to Pet Sitters International, but I had a client that I used to do some training with, and they would occasionally stay at my house, and they wanted their dog fed with a spoon. So I did, but I didn't charge for that. So really I should have charged for that. I would not do that again for no extra fee. But you might have clients that, want something that's just a little bit special, a little bit extra, a little bit whatever. And you can create a package around that. And maybe everybody's not going to buy it. But then if you look at your budget and you say, okay, X number of dogs every month are going to pay my regular rate, but then I've got 20% that will pay a little bit more, that's going to impact your numbers. And it can impact your numbers significantly over time, which is the beauty of the budget.
An example of that, when we started doing lodging with activities for dogs that didn't go to daycare, one of the activities we offered was an outdoor walk. And we were in a very urban area. And so, it was just walking around the block and the sidewalks. I was shocked when people that came to daycare wanted their dog to have an outside walk during the day. Didn't even think about that daycare clients would want to buy that activity on top of their daycare. So I think sometimes we just assume people won't spend more when they actually may and will.
Yeah, and I think definitely this is the time to start looking at some of those so you can really help to increase your revenue. So hopefully that answers your question, Stacy. If you still have follow-on questions, let us know. But I do think just start somewhere. And if you don't, I guess the follow-on question to that is, we do get people that say they don't really have their numbers, whether maybe they're just starting out. And so you don't have enough business history to even know what to budget. In that case, you're really going to be forecasting, which we can talk about in a second. But then a lot of people also just don't keep really good track sometimes. And so sometimes you may not even have the past history in a format that's usable. So the first thing I would say is, let's get that fixed. So I would start right now getting your chart of accounts set up and working with a bookkeeper or somebody that has the skills to at least put your information together going forward. It's not a bad idea if you can easily go back and update your records. It's not a bad idea to do that. But since we're in the fourth quarter of this year, it may be that you just start this right now, getting everything situated, and then you can carry that format, whatever format you decide for your chart of accounts, you can carry that forward into 2021 and start your budget that way. Most of us at the very minimum have our quarterly tax information, our annual tax information. So that can give you at least a starting point of overall revenue that you made and expenses and that kind of thing. So you may be able to pull that and just use that as a starting point. Or if you have a bookkeeper, your bookkeeper may be able to pull some data for you. But if you really have nothing, or if it's just a big hot mess and you just don't want to deal with it, then I would say make the commitment starting now in fourth quarter of this year to start getting everything organized. Then by the end of the year, you'll have a whole quarter's worth and you'll carry that into the next year. But you can start the budget process anyway.
Right. And what one of our clients did that was in Profit Network was she just started creating her budget every month based on her actuals of what she was doing and kind of plugged that in. So then at the end of 12 months, she had her first budget. The one thing about when you budget and when you really dig in and start looking at your numbers, you're going to truly understand how your business makes money and where your business is spending money. And, talking about where to start out, I jumped right into revenue. As far as expenses, how to start out budgeting with expenses, with the exception of probably payroll, I think you can look at history. But I would kind of dig in and make sure you know what's in each of those chart of accounts line items that comes up, like supplies. Well, what makes up supplies? Is it every supply? And that's getting down to what you said, Robin, setting up a chart of accounts to where you have enough detail to understand what you're spending money on. So I didn't have one supply account. I had a supply account for every one of my services I offered. And then I had like a general cleaning, and then I had office supplies separate, because just one big bucket of supplies, you don't have information, I don't think, to make decisions about what's really costing you to run your business.
Yeah, and I think that's what we ended up doing, even with, like, we have a marketing category, but on our budget spreadsheet, but then we have a separate spreadsheet that shows what all's in that marketing category. Because we have we have Facebook ads, we have some marketing folks that help us with SEO, we have some contractors that help us, we do copywriting, and all of that's a totally separate contract, but all of it falls under marketing. But if you were just to ask, if we were just going to, like back in March when we were reviewing our budget and we looked at our market and we were like, oh my gosh, that's really high. But then you can't just say, let's cut some of that. We had to go to that kind of ancillary sheet to see what was actually making up that budget line item. And turns out it's a whole bunch of stuff. Yeah. And so really having that detail, same thing, like Susan said, with supplies, you might have cleaning supplies, you might have supplies for, the kennels, or you might have supplies that you're using in daycare versus supplies you're using in the training facility. Like, you might have all these categories and you want to be able to make some decisions about them and not necessarily overwhelm yourself with information, but you want enough information that you can make some good decisions. That also lets you see if you have increases over time as well.
Right.
So from one year to the next, if something goes up really big, it's worth going back to that. This is very common with vendors. Like, if you're working with a vendor who's providing certain supplies or certain food or treats or cleaning agents, whatever it is, and all of a sudden you get a big jump, I would go back to them and say, okay, why was the increase? And can we negotiate a different payment term, or can we negotiate a different, because I've been a client for a long time, can we lower that? Or maybe you just start looking for a new vendor. I mean, that's an option too, to say, I can get this cheaper somewhere else, or you change the product or whatever. But you want all that information to help you make those decisions.
Yeah, and I'm happy to answer any questions about how would you budget certain things about your business. I said payroll do separately, and I would wait and do my revenue, start with revenue, because revenue is going to drive a lot of your expenses, especially payroll. So if you're adding new revenue streams, or if you're wanting to grow and you have a growth strategy and marketing to actually get units up, then you may need more staff. So, kind of the logical order is you plan your revenue first, and then your payroll is going to be based off somewhat what happened last year, but you may need to make some adjustments to accommodate growth. And of course, my employees always wanted to raise every year, so you needed, to build that in. So I would look at payroll, and since payroll is one of the biggest expenses, spend more time on that. Like Robin said, do your marketing plans so you know exactly what you're planning to do, and put that into the budget based on what contracts you have already out, or what you're planning to do. If there's certain times a year when you're doing more marketing to kind of fill open space versus other times you do less, I would actually build that in based on the month that you're going to be paying for things.
Yeah, and I would make sure you do keep track of your goals that are going to get you to whatever revenue point you've set on your budget. And so an example would be, if, like Susan mentioned earlier, if you have a revenue goal for daycare of X amount, and by breaking that down, you need X number of dogs a day, you can track that. And and if you see halfway through the month that you're like, oh, this is not working well, then you might need to increase your marketing budget, or you might need to start getting on the phone and have your front office staff start calling people to remind them to come in, or to set appointments, or to sell something. Or you might say, okay, for the next 2 weeks, we're going to really focus on upselling something, or to increase your revenue per pet. But it gives you the data if you have those goals in mind. So same thing for us, if we are going to do some kind of a promotion, and this might be maybe at the holidays, you're going to do a promotion to sell X number of holiday meals. Yeah. I would put that number in your budget to say, well, we're going to make $2,000 on holiday meals, but then on a separate sheet of paper somewhere, or you can make it in a note if you're using Excel. That's what our CFO always does. Puts a little note in the box that says, because he then holds us accountable to all of it, is he'll say, you're going to sell, you're going to make $2,000 by selling, X number of these meals for X amount. And now you have a goal to shoot for. And you also know if you don't hit that goal, your budget's not going to be, you're not going to hit your budget goals. So it gives you and your team something to actually know you're shooting for. So I would do that for every part of your revenue. And then if you decide, like maybe going into January, you're like, I need to make more than a normal January, because January typically in the pet industry isn't strong after coming off of the holidays. So maybe you're thinking to yourself, I'm going to budget to make more money in January because I got to kick off the year a little bit better than usual because of the crazy year we've had. Well, you can put that number in the budget, and you can even say, I'm going to increase by 2 dogs every day in daycare. But if you don't have, then the next question is, you've got your budget, you've got your goal. How are you getting to that goal? And if you don't have a way to get there, then it's just a wish. So we would then say, that's where the marketing plan comes in. If you're going to increase your amount of dogs per day, for instance, in a month that's typically low, it's not impossible to do, but you got to have a plan to get there. And that plan's probably going to be starting like towards the middle or end of December, to start getting those reservations in. So this all starts to come together as a whole big strategy for your business. And that's really the beauty of all of it, because you can then say, I am going to increase my revenue in January, and here's how, because we're going to do this, 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 and this. And that's for any month that you want to talk about. If you're otherwise, because I think what most people do is they just say 10% increase, and maybe they get there. Maybe they get there, maybe they don't. Sometimes they get there just because they do a 10% increase in pricing with nothing scheduled for actually generating new clients, and your new clients just kind of happening on its own organically. And that's not bad. It's just that really, if you want to increase a little bit more aggressively, and I would say at this time of the world, in terms of what's happening with COVID and the craziness going on, I think you have to have a much stronger strategy than just hoping for the best. So really putting that in place right alongside your budget is going to help.
So is anybody asking questions?
Nobody has any questions right now. It's very sad.
Because they're budget superstars.
Exactly. I was going to ask you to talk about cash flow though, because that kind of goes a little, it's good segue from what I just.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, the budget will help you know your revenue minus your expenses is your profit, possibly loss, but we're hoping it's profit. Some months it may be a loss because of what Robin said. January, February were slower for my business, and so sometimes those were a loss, which means I kind of knew coming out of the holiday, this was before I was doing my budget, coming out of the holiday, I needed to have some extra cash to get through those first 2 slower months. And so what I like about once you've done a budget and know what your plan profit and loss is by month, then you can actually create a cash flow forecast. So you can do that by knowing, what your starting balance of cash is. And if you have income, that will increase your cash. If you have a loss, it'll decrease your cash. And then you also need to know some of the items that use cash that are not in your P&L. And typically that would be principal portion of notes that you pay, whether you have a mortgage or other loans in your business. The interest part is an expense in your P&L, but the principal part is in your balance sheet. So that doesn't show up. And so that'll use up some of your cash. If you carry credit card balances from month to month, the expense was recorded the month you purchased, but if you didn't pay the card off in full, those extra payments you're making aren't in your P&L, and so those need to come out. And so if you can do a few extra steps when you're creating your budget and plug in those numbers that you'll be able to have a cash flow forecast to know what months you have extra cash, when you're going to be short, what you need to save, and definitely do a plan for how to positive cash flow the whole year so it's not so stressful. And that's what really is sad to me, is how financial stress is one of the worst things to live through. And I think it really impacts you mentally. It drains your energy. You don't sleep well, and it can physically impact you, which is why having a budget and a cash flow plan will take all that away. Even if you don't like the numbers, now you can make a decision because you've got numbers to look at.
Yeah, we say facts are our friends.
Yeah, they really are.
Because even if you don't like them, at least now you know, and it's not a surprise, which I think that adds to the stress when it's all surprising. You're like, I thought I was doing really well. I think the cash flow situation for what we do, we use QuickBooks, but we actually have a budget that's on an Excel template, which then we transfer the information from QuickBooks, because our budget itself is actually much more detailed than what we would be able to put into QuickBooks, because it's got all of those extra supporting documents basically. But on our budget at the bottom of it, it works like a regular budget, expenses at the top, income, revenue at the top, expenses, and then it comes out with here's how much you made this month or lost this month. Under that, then we put other expenses that we might have to be paying. So if we're carrying any kind of sometimes we'll put the coaching that we do. If we pay for that in a year in advance, then we're paying it off usually over a couple of months. So we'll have that underneath. So if there's any kind of thing that we might want to get but haven't really budgeted for, we might put that number in there. So that's where we look at our cash flow, and then you have to subtract that amount from whatever your profit and loss is. And that's the bottom line number that me and Susan always like to look at. What's that number look like? Right. And then, like Susan said, we just like pet care facilities, our business is seasonal as well. And so we try not to make it that way though. So when we do our budget and when we do a budget review, which we'll talk about in a second, we do look at the times that we have a negative in that bottom line number. And then we get together and we go, okay, what can we do to increase the revenue this month or next month or whatever month it is, so that we can have positive cash flow. That's our goal, positive cash flow all the time. And if there's nothing we can do, then we're just telling ourselves, okay, just note to self, don't spend the checkbook down to zero.
Right.
Because like this month we have a ton of excess money. Seems like, wow, we got money in the bank. Let's go buy stuff. We have to remind ourselves next month looks horrible. So save that money to carry us through next month because we still want to get paid. So that's the thing is when you own the business, you guys all know this, when you own the business and you have bills to pay and payroll to pay and vendors to pay, guess whose money gets taken first if you don't plan for it? It's usually the business owner. Right. And Susan and I are committed to not letting that happen. So if that means we have to say, okay, we need to generate more revenue because we're going to have a negative cash flow this particular month, or we just need to make sure we save enough money from an overage a month that we're, so that our pay stays consistent too. And we can pay off all our bills and our payroll and all that. But I think that's critical because so often the answer is, well, I just won't pay myself this month. Yeah. And that sucks too, because it's going to make you hate your business after a while.
And I'm going to give one tip. If I think sometimes what happens is your pricing isn't right. And so one way, this is a quick number you can calculate. And I would do this for your core services. So I talked about daycare. What was the total of your daycare for either a time period, either a month, a year, a quarter, whatever you have? The longer is probably better because you're going to get an average. And you're going to take the dollars and divide by how many pets came in to pay for that service. So how many dogs were in daycare for that same time period. So you divide the dollars by the number of dogs, and that will tell you what I call an effective average rate that you collected for each dog that came to daycare. Compare that number to your published rate, and you may be surprised at the difference. And you're like, well, why isn't it my published rate? Well, it's because we're nice and we give lots of discounts in the form of packages, or we're giving free daycare to foster dogs that are in rescue or employee dogs. And those add up, but you still have to use your space. You're still using your staff to watch these dogs. And so I think sometimes the biggest revelation to business owners is, what is the rate you're actually collecting for your service compared to what you published, which may tell you you can reduce the level of your discounts and then that number will come up, or you just raise your rate and get that number up.
Yeah, that's a great tip. That's one of the easiest ways to generate more revenue without doing anything else, without changing your services, without adding services, without changing your website. I mean, really all you're doing is reducing the discount. And you could still
put money in your pocket because there's no expense related to that. That all goes to profit or owner pay.
And our general rule of thumb is discounting one should benefit your business. Most of the time when we ask people why they discount, well, the owner, has 2 dogs. How is that benefiting your business? It's actually not. It's actually a lot of times harder to care for multiple dogs in a single family. But if your discount is because you're building loyalty, or you have some proof that it's generating more customer visits or something like that, that makes total sense. But if it's really more to help the client, which is unfortunately what we see a lot of in the pet industry, then we would say just rethink that. And that doesn't mean you can't give discounts. We would just say your total discount should be less than 10%. And that could be that one person who you love, who has been coming to your business since day one, so you just don't want to charge them a lot. Maybe they get 15%, but everyone else gets 5% or 3%. So when you average it out, you are in the 10% range. That's what we would really recommend.
Yeah. So if $30 is your published rate, that means when you do that effective rate calculation, it should come out at 27. That would be a 10% discount. And so if you've never done that, do those calculations for your core services, and you're going to learn a lot about why your business is or is not making the profits you deserve for the work you do.
All right. Last thing to talk about is budget reviews. Like, how often should you look at your budget? I really think of the budget as a living document. So it's something you work off of, but how often should you look at it? How often should you change it? What are your thoughts on that?
I would say every month, once you have your budget in place, once you end the month, so let's just say it comes to the end of January, it probably takes you, your bookkeeper or you, a few days to get things in. But in early February, before the 15th of the month, I would be pulling a report to compare my January actuals to my January budget and look for areas where I was either higher or lower by probably more than 10% to plan, to figure out why. And I would do that every month. So that's one step of the process, is just comparing actuals to budget every month along the way. Then in April, so you've had your budget for 3 months. In April, I would do an extra step and saying, okay, I've ran my budget for 3 months. How does it look? How accurate was I in my plan? Because you may have learned some things. Well, boarding's actually coming back faster, and so I'm having a higher occupancy than I planned. Then I would go in and adjust my budget for April, May. Well, probably April would be most of the way over, so I'd probably start in May and adjust my boarding numbers up based on the new data that you actually have from actuals. And so I would, my thing is every month look at it, and then maybe every quarter. So in April, July, October, make adjustments to the budget. Unless you just know something blew up and is totally wrong, then go ahead and fix that one item.
Yeah, and then like we said, when COVID happened, as Susan mentioned, we went to looking at our budget every week just to make adjustments based on the reality of what was happening in the world at that time. That was back in March. And we did that probably for about 2 months, and then till we started feeling comfortable that things were settling down a bit, and we went back to monthly reviews. But we have that monthly review is on our calendar. It's the second Monday of every month that we have on our calendar to get together and look at the budget. And we also look at all of our KPIs at the same time. So it's a scheduled monthly meeting that we put on the calendar at the beginning of every year. And if you do that, it's a lot less likely that you will forget about it or put it off. Because even for us, it's easy to put it off because it's just things happen and we're really busy, as you guys know. It's just busy running it. You're busy running a pet care facility, and right now, staffing situations come up, client issues come up. So I would just recommend just go right now and pick a date and say at this time every month we're going to look at the budget. And you don't have to do all the work yourself. Susan and I look at the data with our CFO. But our CFO, who happens to be my husband, he actually takes the budget, finalizes it, closes everything out, and then puts it all in a spreadsheet that shows us the comparison. He enters all the data, and then what he's on the call with us, and he walks us through it. And then we're just making decisions on the data, or we're asking questions if something looks funny or whatever. But don't feel like you have to do all the data collection, all the entries, hire somebody to help you with that. Your job is to look at the data and make decisions.
And having those regular meetings and having that information will pay for that position in time. It truly will. A bookkeeper is not that expensive. And if you've never had one, get a recommendation from other business owners or from your accountant, and find one that's willing to do the reports every month and tell them, I want to do an actual to budget comparison and operate from a budget, and make sure they're able to help you do that. And then it's a meeting you have with them and tell them, hold me accountable, make sure I'm here every month. You don't have to do it all, because your time is best spent looking at the data and making decisions that's strategically going to ensure long-term the financial well-being of the company and you as a business owner.
All right. Hopefully we convince some of them to start doing their budget. We do have some tools that can help you if you are looking for assistance. I don't think we mentioned at the beginning that Susan, actually, her background is she has a master's in accountancy, which makes her the real guru of finances. But what I appreciate about Susan, and she has taught me so much, is that she breaks it down and makes it easy. So she's not your typical accountant, as we like to say.
That's what I like to say.
Which is why we like that about her. But she has created a lot of done-for-you templates. She's created a lot of workbooks. She's created a lot of resources that you'll find in our store. But we, in particular, created a pretty extensive budget implementation toolkit that we are making available right now that actually will have you get your budget done in 60 days. Cool. So you want this, you want to get it done, you want to actually go into the holidays, maybe not Thanksgiving, but certainly by the holidays in December, and be done with your budget. This is the tool that we would recommend. So do you want to give a little bit of about top tips about that, Susan?
Yeah, the implementation toolkit works off an Excel template, but before that, there's a workbook that helps you make some of these strategic business decisions for your business so that you will have the data to put into the Excel workbook. And we do that interview style. So even if you're not into numbers, you can fill out the workbook. And if you do have a bookkeeper, then you hand them the completed workbook and say, here's an Excel template, here's my answers, create my budget. And then we're going to review it. And there's also steps of key questions to ask when you look at that first draft, because you're probably not going to be happy with the first draft. If you are, you're settling. You're going to want to push yourself to increase your profits and your cash flow. So you're probably going to do multiple drafts. But what I love about the way this template works is it does have the units and the pricing, and you can do some of these scenarios really quickly. You can ask your bookkeeper, well, let's say I increase my daycare rates by $1 starting in May. That would take about 1 minute in this template, and then you could see the immediate difference in your profit by that one business decision. And so that's why I get excited about this tool. And we also have a cash flow spreadsheet. So one of the worksheets, and everything's connected in the budget template. So it all carries through. And so you can then also do a cash flow forecast. You just drop in those payments and your budget becomes a cash flow forecast as well. And I know this isn't comfortable for a lot of people. So I've done a lot of videos along the way. We have a preparation phase we walk you through. We even have a schedule and a checklist. You can just check things off. And yes, this will be done in 60 days. It will take setting some meetings and time aside from your business. But I would challenge you to tell me what's more important than investing time right now in getting a budget in place so that you can make some strategic decisions and have that confidence and peace of mind about your financial picture for 2021. And I think this is very affordable. It's over $1,000 in value, but Robin and I are so passionate about everybody being able to get a budget in place. The toolkit is only $2.99, and we're only offering it for the next 2 weeks. So it's something to take advantage of. We have, I did a webinar that goes into more detail of a lot of things we talked about and shows some examples of how to put a budget together. There's a replay you can watch, or you can say, all right, I'm in. I'm just going to go make this the year. I get a budget in place for my business, and it's $2.99. And the other great thing is once you have the Excel template and the workbook, you use it every year. So you don't have to buy it again. So really, it's peanuts.
Yeah. And Sequoia did ask, she said she missed the webinar yesterday. Is there a way to access that? If you had signed up for the webinar, you should have already gotten the replay. If you didn't sign up the webinar, just email me or PM me and just give me your email address, and I can send you over the replay of that. So the replay is available if you want to watch that. Portia said budgeting is so important. So we love that. And then Sequoia also said, this is a great question. Would love some tips and tricks on knowing your worth. So I'll start, and then I'll throw that over to Susan. But I actually talked about this yesterday, or was it the day before? I can't remember when I did that. I just did a presentation for Pet Sitters International, and I talked about knowing what you're worth, because that is the starting point to making sure you're getting enough money. So what I tell people to do is, number one, just add up how many hours you work each week. Simple, right? And then look at your and then calculate that by whatever period of time you have data for. So let's just say it's a year. How many hours a week on average do you work a year? Multiply by that year, and then look at how much revenue you made, and then do the math. What are you paying yourself as an hourly rate? And most of the time, it'll depress you. So that's the first starting point, though, is before you ask, because we are going to ask what you're worth, but first, what are you actually paying yourself now? Then the second thing is, because what most people factor in is like the hours they're actually at their building, or if you're a pet sitter, the hours you're actually doing a pet sitting job or walking a dog, or if you're doing daycare, you're factoring in the hours you're helping with the dogs, or maybe you're at their office. But if you're most business owners, you're also doing hours outside of that actual job with the pet to run your business. So I want you to add up all those hours. Like, what are the actual hours you spend working, and what's your revenue? Do the division and figure out what you're paying yourself. Now think about, if you had to replace yourself, what would you pay someone to replace yourself? Would they take the same salary? And usually the answer is no, because usually you're going to end up with some ridiculously low salary that's depressing to think about. And so then when you say, okay, if I was actually going to replace myself, what would I have to pay somebody? At the very minimum, you should be getting, if you're the owner, you should be getting paid more than anyone else on your staff. I would look at that as well. And a lot of times, again, goes back to what I said earlier. A lot of times when it comes to, you have staff to pay, you have bills to pay, you have vendors to pay, you have, all of this stuff. A lot of times, if you don't have a plan, you're the one that suffers, the business owner, because you're like, I got to suck it up. I can't take a paycheck this month because I don't have any money left, which is one of the reasons we want you to budget. But look at all of those. And then I would look at what do you want to, because really how much you're worth is really up to you. How much do you want to make out of your business? What amount of money makes it worthwhile for you to have the stress and anxiety and the fun? Because it is fun to be a business owner, to be an entrepreneur, but there is also a lot of stress and anxiety. So what do you want to make yourself? Like, what would make you happy? And I would look at that from the standpoint of monetarily, what kind of money do you want? But also, what kind of lifestyle do you want? And sometimes the lifestyle isn't necessarily related to money. It's like, I want a 20-hour-a-week job and $75,000 a year. I mean, it might look like that. It might be, I'll work 80 hours a week as long as I get $200,000, whatever. It's totally up to you. The last survey that we did, which was back in 2017, the average amount that somebody was making who owned a pet care facility was in the $75,000 range. So I would shoot for that as a bare minimum. And that'll equate to something around 36, maybe 40, somewhere in there, dollars an hour. So I don't know, Susan, if you have any other thoughts on that.
No, I think you did a great summation of how you look at it for you personally. I think if you then look at, okay, I've got services I'm offering, how do I value those? You've got to look at your cost before you can set your rates for your services. And too often our only comparison, how we price, is based on our competition in the marketplace. But you don't know what their costs are to provide services. And very likely you're providing better service.
And you don't know if they're making any money.
Yeah, you don't know if they're making any money.
That's my big thing about them saying, well, the places down the street are only charging X amount. Are they profitable? Or are they going to go out of business in 2 years? Like, you don't know. So that's the other problem with that. Yeah. But hopefully that does help. But yeah, the starting point in terms of pricing is definitely understanding how much it costs you to operate the service, including your fixed cost, because that's the piece I feel like people understand. Okay, I have to pay let's say you're going to do daycare. I have to pay the daycare staff. I have to pay for some cleaning supplies, and maybe I have to pay for some administration. And then they figure out those costs, and then they fix a price. Well, who's paying for the mortgage or the
right.
Like, nobody ever likes to factor in those. Or who's paying for your insurance? Who's paying for all of the fixed costs that you're going to have, the utilities, anything that you're paying with, whether you have one dog in the facility or 100 dogs in the facility, who's paying for those things? You have to allocate some of that money to your services as well to cover those costs.
And we've worked with a lot of clients that, because we have a different tool that helps us know that. And I would say probably on the low side is what I see is $8 per dog is fixed costs. So that means, yeah, all the costs you just talked about, Robin, as far as the salaries and all, add another $8 on that, and then make sure you're charging to still have a profit, which we say should be at least 10%. And so pricing, I think, is definitely an issue. And I don't know if we've talked about pricing in a while. We'll have to do that.
No, we should do a whole Facebook Live on pricing.
Oh, yeah, for days.
We could talk for days on all of this. All right, but we are at 55 minutes. So we appreciate you guys that have jumped on with us. If you're interested in the budget toolkit, just click on that link that I put in there. If you're interested in just carrying on the conversation, I did put a link earlier to our Grow Your Pet Care business page, which is free. It's a Facebook group, actually, that you can post on and ask questions. There's other pet care business owners there, so we would love to have you there as well. The 2 rules we have over there is you have to be nice and you have to not sell stuff. So those 2 rules, if you can live by those 2 rules, then you're welcome to join us over there. And as I mentioned, if you did miss the replay and you want to get that, just send me an email at robin@thedoggurus.com and I can get you that replay to our budget webinar that we just did 2 days ago. I don't remember. My days are all messed up this week. I don't remember.
Yeah, and we will definitely be talking budgeting in the Facebook group over the next 60 days because our toolkit people will be in there and Robin and I will be in there helping you. So you don't have to do this alone. You've got Robin and I, you've got our other coaches, and you've got a community. And I think it would be fun to kind of do this with other people. And if you've never done it, you're going to have support and help getting it done.
Yeah.
And there's no judgment, no stupid questions. Yeah. We're here to help you get this done. And the first time it may not be perfect. A budget's never going to be perfect. But gosh, you're going to learn a lot about your business. And every time you do one, you get better. I mean, I think Greg's been doing 3 or 4 years and our budget is really good now. It's
amazing. And it's got so much detail, but we didn't start that way. We started with broad categories. And then as we've gone on each year, it gets more and more detailed.
So you just got to get started, and this year will be tough. You'll hate it, but we'll be in the Facebook group encouraging you to stick with it, that it'll be worth it. And then every year it'll get better, and you're going to add value to your business when you do this. I mean, I just cringe at how much money I left on the table. And when I sold my business, I lost out because I hadn't built that value in every year.
Yeah, we guarantee you it's going to change the way you're doing everything. And so for the good. So definitely get started with that. If you have questions, we're happy to answer them. You can post comments here on Facebook. And as I mentioned, if you have other folks that might benefit from learning a little bit more about budgeting, you're welcome to share this Facebook page with them or Facebook post with them as well. Otherwise, have a great rest of the week, I guess I should say, everybody. And we'll talk to you sometime in the future on our next Facebook Live. Bye, everyone.